This meeting is being recorded, if you didn't know already. And now we're going to share screen. Welcome, welcome, welcome. They're always tinkering with Zoom and waiting for this thing to load. Come now, please. Load. Oh, okay. You decided to work, didn't you? Okay. Let's see if this works.
Yep.
It did?
We can see it.
Oh, then I can't see it. How come I can't see it? Right? All right, there we go. Well, okay. Welcome to our next episode in Meditation, Judaism, and Self-Mastery. We're still on Ruach HaKodesh, otherwise known as Enlightenment. We're going through Rabbi Kaplan's essays that will contribute our understanding of this topic. They're essays from a short book he wrote called Immortality and the Soul. And we're doing part 2 of that, and it's called Naked Before God. We're also going to discuss how to handle distractions when meditating. Thus far, we've covered the Amidah as a mode of Jewish meditation, achieving consciousness of God through prayer. Hitbodedut, becoming mindful through internal and external isolation. And we're currently on Ruach HaKodesh, or Enlightenment, transcending the physical through work on yourself. Really interesting. And if you consider that working on yourself should be a constant activity, then this is a constant meditation. Upcoming, we have other modes of Jewish meditation, including unification, which involves experiencing oneness with God by reciting the Shema, and blessing power, meditations to bring you closer to God through mundane acts. All these from Rabbi Kaplan. So, what do we know so far about Ruach HaKodesh, otherwise known as Enlightenment? We recall that Rabbi Kaplan mentioned there are 3 words in Tanakh usually associated with what people call the soul, their nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Maybe there are 3 basic levels, maybe there are sub-levels, we'll have to find out. And he also mentions in this book, Meditation and the Bible, that the way to achieve Ruach HaKodesh and ascend through these levels of the soul are by developing certain midot, certain personality characteristics. And they include study, carefulness, diligence, cleanliness, abstention, purity, piety, humility, fear of sin, and holiness. So here we have the origin of what you might consider to be the personal growth or self-development movement. We have that emphasis right in the middle of our lifestyle. Okay, we then branched out a little bit into an essay by Ethan Dorshav called Soul and Fire, A Theory of Biblical Man. And this metaphysical philosopher and Judaic scholar gave us a little bit of insight into the use of these words, nefesh, ruach, and neshama. And briefly, what he told us was that based on his study of Tanakh and the use of these words and the context in which these words are used, we actually have a four levels of the soul. And as a matter of fact, the line between what we have been calling body and soul is blurred because it's all part of a continuum. We have a body which is eitzim, which is bones, surrounded by basar, a biological coating, and then we have the nefesh, which is our blood in the water and the circulation, and then we have the ruach, which is the breathing apparatus, and then we have the neshama. And interestingly, when we die, there's a certain integration of these parts of ourselves, of our soul, into its environment. the biological part of us, the Eitzim and Basar goes into the biosphere, the earth, and the Nefesh part of us in the water that's in our body goes into the water system, and the Ruach part of us, that which travels through us with our breathing apparatus, goes into the wind that is shared by all the breathing creatures. And then Neshama, it's the fire part of us, that goes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in some way. So what's mind-blowing about this analogy is that we don't have like a body-soul dichotomy, it's all one continuum, and the body is kind of like the root part of the soul, which is interesting. And as I mentioned a few weeks ago, my image of this is kind of like what we talk about energy, that depending on which point of view you take, energy is either a particle or a wave. I think that's kind of like what we're talking about. If you stand still, you have a body. But if you see it in motion, it's all part of the wave of what's happening in our existence. So that we don't have a soul, we are a soul. Okay, at least in the macro picture. But that brought up the micro picture. That brought up, okay, on the larger level, when we die, there's this integration of our component soul parts into its environment. But what about us? What happened to the person that died? Okay, so we started the essay with Rabbi Kaplan from Immortality in the Soul, the first part of it being Meet the Real You. And we addressed the questions, are you your body? Are you your brain? Are you your memories? Where do you go when you die? And he talked about God's memory. So it was very advanced and a little bit tricky, but but he basically talked about our memories and our thoughts and the usness that we identify with integrating with God's memory of us. So God, the implication being that God is storing everybody's memories and thoughts in some kind of memory bank, so to speak. And when we die, that part of ourselves is integrated into that. And the reason why I brought that idea out was because, if you recall, at the end of Ethan Dorshov's essay, he talked about our name integrating to become part of God's name, so to speak. So a part of us integrating with everybody else to form God's name, whatever that is. So there's an interesting parallel here between Ethan Dorshov's image of when we die, our essence, our name. And again, it's not just Steve Cobrin. There's an essential, there's a package of us that constitutes our name, which we'll get into. That integrates with the packages of other people. And Ethan Dorshov mentioned that when we say Kaddish, it's kind of like a hope that there is that integration. We hope that when somebody dies, that their name, their essence is integrated. And if all of our essences become together, then that's a tribute to God. So here we have a similar idea with Rabbi Kaplan talking about this integration of our so-called memory with God's memory. So I see a parallel idea there. Okay. So still very lofty, and so I'm trying to bring it down to the ground a bit, so that we can relate to the death experience a little bit more personally and identify with it a little bit more closely, because everybody think, what's going to happen to me? Okay, I understand my breath and my fire and my I understand all that, but what about me? Okay, so that's what we're going to start getting into today. And okay, that's what and we're going to relate it to, we're going to start relating it to Rabbi Kaplan's notion that you need to develop certain parts, you need to develop a certain personality You need to have develop certain midot, certain personality characteristics in order to ascend through the levels of the soul. Okay, so we're going to get on that who are you, what kind of person are you track today. With this guy, the R.E.A. Kaplan Anthology, which has a number of his books. This one's going to be Immortality and the Soul with the Naked Before God. That's his second essay in this book. This is what he says. And to follow along, these are the general topics that he discusses in this particular essay. This is what he says. We have seen that our knowledge of the mind and our traditions regarding God can give us some handle on the questions of immortality, meaning some part of us persisting after we go. But what is immortality like? What is it like to be a disembodied soul? How does it feel to be in the world of soul? We know that the human brain, marvelous organ that it is still very inefficient as a thinking device. Henry Bergson has suggested that one of the main functions of the brain and nervous system is to eliminate activity and awareness rather than produce it. All right, so he's a physicist, so he's making a claim that our brain is not an efficient thinking device. Okay, we'll take that for now. He doesn't elaborate. Maybe we'll find some information to back that up. But he's making a point that according to another source, the function of our brain and nervous system is to act as a funnel, act as a filter. And then he moves on. He says, Aldous Huxley quotes Professor C.D. Broad's comments on this. He says that every person is capable of remembering everything that has ever happened to him. He is able to perceive everything that surrounds him. However, if all this information poured into our minds at once, it would overwhelm us. So the function of the brain and nervous system is to protect us and prevent us from being overwhelmed and confused by the vast amount of information that impinges upon our sense organs. They shut out most of what we perceive and remember. All that would confound us is eliminated, and only the small special selection that is useful is allowed to remain. That's what he's positing. Huxley explains that our mind has powers of perception and concentration that we cannot even begin to imagine. But our main business is to survive at all costs. To make survival possible, all of our mind's capabilities must be funneled through the reducing valve of the brain. Some researchers are studying this effect. They believe that this reducing valve effect may be very similar to the jamming equipment used to block out offensive radio broadcasts. The brain constantly produces a kind of static, cutting down our perception and reducing our mental activity. This static can actually be seen. When you close your eyes, you see all sorts of random pictures flashing through your mind. It is impossible to concentrate on any one of them for more than an instant, and each image is obscured by a host of others superimposed over it. This static can even be seen when your eyes are opened. However, one usually ignores these images since they are so faint compared to our visual perception. However, they still reduce one's perception, both of the world around him and of himself. So I think we're all familiar with this. You know, I always wondered, like, what is that stuff? Are you looking at your eyelids, the backs of your eyelids? He says that whatever you want to call it, that stuff you see when your eyes are closed, and then you can even see if you pay attention when your eyes are open. He says that is the brain putting up a filter so that you can see only what you want to see, only what's important to see, and not see too much to blow a fuse on your brain. Much of what we know about this static is a result of research done with drugs that eliminate it. According to a number of authorities, this is precisely how the psychedelic drugs work. I have read this a number of times. Now, imagine the mental activity of a disembodied soul standing naked before God. The reducing valve is gone entirely. The mind is open and transparent. Things can be perceived in a way that is impossible to a mind held back by a body and nervous system. The visions and understanding are the most delightful bliss imaginable. And then he quotes, he lists the source, as per the righteous sitting with their crowns on their heads, delighting in the shine of the Shekhinah. That's definitely from Nabi somewhere. This is what Job meant when he said, and when after my skin is destroyed, then without my flesh shall I see God. But then an individual will also see himself in a new light. Every thought and memory will be lucid, and he will see himself for the first time without the static and jamming that shuts out most thoughts. So he's basically describing death as you still have an awareness, even though you don't have your body. You're not using your body. Your body's not functioning. And because your body's not functioning, this brain/nervous system filter is removed. So all the broad world that you've been filtering up to this point, you're now seeing the whole thing. And then an individual will also see himself in a new light. You're not just seeing the world, you're seeing yourself in a new light. Every thought and memory will be lucid, and he will see himself for the first time without the static and jamming that shuts out most thoughts. So if you had thoughts about yourself that bothered you, like, as they say, a guilty conscience or something, when we have our body, when we have the use of the brain and nervous system, then we're able to suppress those thoughts and think about other stuff or put other images in our mind and pay attention to those. But if you don't have that filter, then you can't suppress those thoughts. Even in our mortal physical state, looking at oneself can sometimes be pleasing and at other times very painful. Certain acts leave us proud and pleased with ourselves. Others cause excruciating pains, especially when we are caught. Imagine standing naked before God with your memory wide open, completely transparent without any jamming mechanism or reducing valve to diminish its force. You will remember everything you ever did and see it in a new light. You will see it in the light of the unshaded spirit, or if you will, in God's own light that shines from one end of creation to the other. The memory of every good deed and mitzvah will be the sublimest of pleasures, as our tradition speaks of olam haba. But your memory will also be open to all the things of which you are ashamed. They cannot be rationalized away or dismissed. You will be facing yourself, fully aware of the consequences of all your deeds. We all know the terrible shame and humiliation experienced when one is caught in the act of doing something wrong. Imagine being caught by one's own memory with no place to escape. This indeed may be what the prophet Daniel is alluding to when he says, and many of them that sleep in the dust shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to reproach and everlasting shame. So he's making the point that when your filter is removed, when your body, and you're divested of your body, and you're divested of the filtering system that is your brain and nervous system, you not only see the huge world, you also see yourself as part of the world, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you no longer have the use of your filter to say, well, I'm going to dwell on this and not dwell on that. It's all there. A number of our great teachers write that the fire of Gehenna is actually the burning shame one experiences because of his sins. Again, this may be alluded to in the words of the prophet Isaiah, and they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have rebelled against me, meaning God, he's talking as God here, or for God. For their worm shall not die, nor shall their fire be quenched, and they shall be ashamed before all flesh. We find that evil leads to shame, as it is written in Jeremiah. Are they angering me, says God? Are they not provoking themselves to their own shame? Behold, my anger shall not burn and shall not be quenched. The main concept of reward is that it be without shame, as we find in Yoel, in the prophet Joel, and you shall eat and be satisfied, and my people shall never be ashamed. So he's quoting a bunch of verses in Tanakh, and in particular, they are emphasizing the insights of the Nevi'im, which talk about the afterlife, ideally being shame-free. If the life after death is to be without shame, then what does that mean? It means that you live your life a certain way to not bring that you don't feel ashamed of what you're doing. So now we're heading into the territory of living life a certain way and developing certain personality characteristics so you avoid feeling ashamed. The Talmud provides us with even stronger evidence that shame burns like fire. It states, Rabbi Hanania says, this teaches us that each one in the world of souls is burned by the canopy of his companion. Woe for that shame, woe for that humiliation. We find that shame is a major form of punishment. And the Medrash on the verse in Psalms that says, all your enemies shall be ashamed and very confounded, Rabbi Joshua ben Levi says, God only curses the wicked with shame. This is also alluded to in the Talmudic statement, it is better for Amram to suffer shame in this world and not in the world to come, implying maybe you feel ashamed now, but you got to do something to get past that and not feel ashamed anymore. Similarly, blessed, there's a quote here, it doesn't give the source, blessed is God who gave him shame in this world and not the next. In this world, so you can do something about it, while you still have your body and the filter and everything else the body gives you to do something about it, like perform a mitzvah. When the Zohar speaks of the future reward, it says, happy is he who comes here without shame. Of course, these concepts of fire and shame, as used by our sages, may also contain deeper mysteries and meanings. But taken literally, one says that a major ingredient of fire may be shame. How else could one characterize the agony of unconcealed shame upon a soul? We are taught that the judgment of the wicked lasts 12 months. And that's why, as I understand it, the final stage of bereavement lasts 12 months, but I think it's really 11 months minus a day. But there's a parallel there. Even the naked soul can gradually learn to live with the shame and forget it, and the pain eventually subsides. It may be more than coincidence that 12 months is also the length of time required for something to be forgotten in Talmudic law. Thus, one mourns a parent for 12 months and says a special blessing upon seeing a close friend after this period of time. Of course, there is an exception to this rule. There are the non-believers and worst of sinners reckoned in the Talmud. These individuals have nothing else but their shame and have no escape from everlasting torment. But even temporary torment is beyond our imagination. The Ramban writes that all the suffering of Job were not compared to an instant Gehenna. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says the same of a man who suffered for years from the most indescribable torments. It is still better than a single burning Gehenna. Mental torture cannot be compared to the mere physical. Here again, when we speak of Gan Eden and Gehenna, we find that we are not discussing mystical concepts, but ideas that are well within the realm of scientific psychology, such as shame. We can now proceed a step further, which is his next chapter. So he really finishes here with a big bang. So first of all, he's making a point about how long the shame of wicked people lasts. Wicked people. So wicked people have not done too much to avoid shame. And, people like the people these days that are wrecking the world, they're in for a big trial by fire when they die. And actually, this is one of the arguments that Dennis Prager uses to logically prove that there's an afterlife. He goes, if God is good, but bad people are, and the world is good, but bad people are prospering, and God, they're going to get theirs when they die because God is fair, and good people get rewarded and bad people get punished. And if you don't see bad people getting punished because they're getting away with stuff in this world, just wait and see what happens to them when they die. That's kind of his logic about why there has to be a hereafter. So he's saying that people that don't do any of this work on themselves, their period of dealing with their shame lasts 12 months. And he points out that this 12-month duration pops up in other areas too. He mentions mourning for a parent. I think there's also, unfortunately, for a child, 12 months. And for a brother or sister for 12 months. I think the only exception is for a spouse, which is 30 days. So, maybe saying Kaddish for that amount of time is to try to hope that any trial they're going through, unfortunately, is done. And so he says that it's unimaginable torment, and that there are people, he says, non-believers and the worst of sinners. He says that there are those people that never get rid of it. So maybe we'll come across a source for that. That's quite a cursed existence. Okay. So the reason why this is important and why this is relating to our overall discussion is this. If when we die, if you're concerned about what happens to you when you die, well, be mindful of the fact that Rabbi Kaplan is emphasizing that if you want to become enlightened, if you want to be able to climb up the ladders of the soul, so to speak, then you have to develop certain personal qualities. We talked about them. You got to be a good guy, a good person. And here, it makes sense because if you develop these midot, if you become a good person, then you have a lot less to worry about when you die because you're more full of pride than shame. You've got stuff that you don't regret. You did the right thing. And that makes your experience when you die a lot better, because when you see yourself and the world unfiltered, what you're seeing is pretty good stuff. So that's got to be a good experience, as opposed to not putting in the time to develop those midot and basically not becoming a good person. Then that's going to be a real hot time, so to speak. So there we see the connection between Rabbi Kaplan's understanding, especially from Nach, especially from the Nevi'im, of what happens to you personally when you die, to the whole idea of achieving enlightenment in this time. If you achieve enlightenment, which we would call Ruach HaKodesh, then when you die, your transition is pretty darn good. You don't mind not having the body or the brain and nervous system as a filter. Like, bring it on. I want to see this stuff. I want to, everything in your life and the world is good because you lived a certain way. So next week, we're going to finish this section, and his essay there is called What the Dead Think of Us. So that's going to be another mind blower. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about meditation with Bante. And we're going to talk about understanding distractions. Okay. If you recall last time, since he is so perceptive, he mentioned that how distractions form in our subconscious, and it starts developing there, and then it pops up in our consciousness, and we develop and we're like, oh yeah, now I'm distracted. So we mentioned that one of the best, that when we develop the skill of detaching ourselves from our stream of consciousness, that is a powerful skill because it allows us, it activates the subconscious. And so that when we're meditating and thoughts or emotions start popping up, if we've trained ourselves sufficiently to detach from them, we're doing so in subconsciously already. And when it pops up in the consciousness, it just floats away as opposed to our lunging for and attaching ourselves to it. Okay. Okay. So it's a work in progress to develop that skill. What do you do until it's strong enough? He says, one method is to ask 3 questions. What is it? How strong is it? And how long does it last? These 3 questions are a clever remedy for this particular malady. In order to answer these questions, we must ascertain the quality of the distraction. To do that, we must divorce ourselves from it, take a mental step back from it, disengage from it, and view it objectively. We must stop thinking the thought or feeling. We must stop thinking the thought or feeling the feeling in order to view it as an object of inspection. This very process is an exercise in mindfulness, uninvolved, detached awareness. The hold of the distraction is thus broken, and mindfulness is back in control. At this point, mindfulness makes a smooth transition back to its primary focus, and we return to the breath. So you train yourself to say, ooh, I'm distracted. All right, what am I distracted about? How strong is that distraction? How long have I been distracted? The asking those questions is itself a way of detaching from the distraction. When you first begin to practice this technique, you will probably have to do it with words. You will ask your questions in words and get answers in words. It won't be long, however, before you can dispense with the formality of words altogether. That's true. Once the mental habits are in place, you simply note the distraction, note the qualities of the distraction, and return to the breath. It's a totally non-conceptual process. It's very quick. Once you start out more grossly, just saying words like, what did I just think about? Yeah, sardines, okay. After a while, it's like, oh, you acknowledge, you intuitively know what it is. You don't even have to say it. The distraction itself can be anything, a sound, a sensation, an emotion, a fantasy, anything at all. Whatever it is, don't try to repress it. He always says that. Don't force it, no force. Don't try to push it aside. Try to focus it out of your, don't try to force it out of your mind. There's no need for that. Just observe it mindfully with bare attention. Examine the distraction wordlessly, and it will pass away by itself. You will find your attention drifting effortlessly back to the breath. And do not condemn yourself for having been distracted. Distractions are natural. They come and they go. Now, what he just said relates a lot to what Rabbi Kaplan was saying. Why? Because he's talking about training yourself to not hide, not push aside thoughts that are bugging you. In this case, they're bugging you because you want to be meditating and it's taking you away from meditation. But the thoughts can bug you for whatever reason in other contexts. So so here he's saying, no, don't run away from the thought. Look it in the eye and let it run. So if you do that, if you're able to do that with distractions and meditation, that can carry over to being able to do that and other thoughts that are bothering you. You don't run away. You don't suppress it. You just like, all right, let me deal with this. So you can see how this skill in meditation helps you live the way you're supposed to live, so that when you die, you have less to worry about, because you haven't been tucking all these other things, all these thoughts and memories and experiences under the rug. It's really interesting. Okay, despite this piece of sage counsel, you're going to find yourself condemning anyway. Yeah, we get down on ourselves. That's natural too. Just observe the process of condemnation as another distraction and then return to the breath. That's really clever. You get down, oh man, I did it again. Oh, here I am getting down on myself. So you bring the mindfulness to like a meta layer on top of this. Here I am realizing I'm distracted. Oh, here I am getting down on myself because I'm getting distracted again. Oh, so you're mindful about that as well. Watch the sequence of events: breathing, distracting, thought arising, frustration arising over the distraction thought. You condemn yourself for being distracted. You notice the self-condemnation. You return to the breathing. It's really a very natural, smooth-flowing cycle if you do it correctly. The trick, of course, is patience. If you can learn to observe these distractions without getting involved, it's all very easy. You just glide through the distraction and your attention returns to the breath quite easily. Of course, the very same distraction may pop up a moment later. If it does, just observe that mindfully. If you are dealing with an old established thought pattern, this can go on happening for quite a while, sometimes years. Don't get upset. This too is natural. Just observe the distraction and return to the breath. Don't fight with these distracting thoughts. Like, don't give yourself a mental complex. Don't strain or struggle. It's a waste. Every bit of energy that you apply to that resistance goes into the thought complex and makes it all the stronger. How true that is. You say, oh, now I'm thinking about this. You just gave it more power. So don't try to force such thoughts out of your mind. It's a battle you can never win. And by the way, this is like a good OCD counter agent. So don't try to force such thoughts out of your mind. It's a battle you can never win. Just observe the distraction mindfully and it will eventually go away. It's very strange, but the more bare attention you pay to such disturbances, the weaker they get. And again, when he says bare attention, he means, you just look at it and let it go, not think about it. Observe them long enough and often enough with bare attention, and they fade away forever. Fight with them and they gain strength. Watch them with detachment and they wither. This guy knows what he's talking about. And you can see there's such great compatibility between his approach to meditation, how he describes meditation, and our emphasis on the relationship with God and becoming and how we should be living and the meetup we should be developing. So that's why meditation is the foundation of Jewish living. No doubt about it in my mind. Okay, let us stop sharing. Let us stop recording.